3 years ago, my father pointed at my pregnant sister and screamed, "You are not bringing that shame into my house." My mother opened the front door herself and threw her suitcase onto the porch. That night, my sister slept on my couch holding a pharmacy bag and crying so hard she couldn't breathe. For 3 years, our parents never called, never visited, never even asked the baby's name. Then last month, they showed up at my nephew's birthday party uninvited. And the second my father saw the blue blanket wrapped around that little boy, the cake slipped out of his hands. My name is Vanessa Holloway. I'm 32 years old. And honestly, what happened at that birthday party changed my family forever. If you're watching this right now, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe if stories like this hit differently for you. I read every comment. My younger sister Elena Holloway used to be my parents' favorite child. Quiet, straight-A student, church volunteer. The daughter everybody bragged about constantly. Meanwhile, I was always the independent one, the responsible daughter. The one expected to solve problems quietly while Elena got protected from everything. But honestly, there was always something strange about our house growing up. Certain subjects disappeared instantly when mentioned. Certain rooms stayed closed. And every single year, my father refused to celebrate birthdays properly anymore. No decorations, no family photos, no singing after midnight. At the time, I thought my parents were just emotionally distant people. I didn't realize yet. Our family had already been grieving someone long before Elena got pregnant. The night Elena told our parents, the entire house changed instantly. My father stood up so fast his chair slammed backward. My mother covered her mouth immediately, and Elena just sat there shaking quietly with both hands over her stomach. Then my father pointed directly at her and yelled, "You embarrassed this family." Honestly, I'd never seen my sister look that terrified before. But what scared me most wasn't the yelling. It was my mother's reaction. Because the second Elena mentioned the baby, my mother looked toward the upstairs hallway automatically, toward the locked attic door nobody opened anymore. And for just a second, she looked terrified of something much older than this pregnancy. My mother packed Elena's clothes into black trash bags that same night. Not luggage, trash bags. I still remember Elena staring at those bags silently while crying, like every shirt folded inside them made the rejection feel more real. And honestly, that moment changed how I saw my mother forever. Because throwing someone out is cruel, but packing their life into trash bags feels personal. Then suddenly, while stuffing clothes into one bag, my mother froze completely. Just froze. Because Elena's blue sweater slipped onto the floor. And honestly, the reaction made no sense at the time. My mother stared at that sweater like it physically hurt her to look at it. Then quietly whispered, "Not that color. Not again." The room went completely silent. Because suddenly, my mother didn't look angry anymore. She looked terrified. Honestly, that was the first moment I realized blue wasn't just a color inside our house anymore. It was connected to something nobody talked about. Something buried so deeply in our family that even seeing it accidentally still hurt. Before leaving, Elena quietly ran upstairs one last time. A few minutes later, she came back holding something tightly against her chest, an ultrasound picture, folded slightly from being hidden under her mattress for weeks. But honestly, that wasn't the strangest part, because taped behind the ultrasound photo was an old, faded picture I recognized immediately. A little boy smiling while wrapped in a pale blue blanket. I only saw it for a second before Elena hid it again. But honestly, that image stayed in my head all night. Because nobody in our family kept old childhood photos visible anymore, especially not photos connected to him. Then, as Elena adjusted the blanket corner accidentally, I noticed faded stitched initials near the fabric edge, E.H. Ethan Holloway. And suddenly, my stomach tightened. Because Elena didn't just take some random keepsake from the attic. She took something nobody in our family had emotionally touched for years. My father carried the trash bags onto the porch himself, then locked the front door immediately after Elena stepped outside. And honestly, that sound, the deadbolt locking, felt colder than anything he actually screamed. Because suddenly, my sister wasn't family anymore. She became something they wanted erased. But right before we left, I looked back through the hallway one last time, and upstairs, I saw something strange. The attic light was on. Nobody had touched that attic in years, not since my older brother Ethan died. And honestly, that was the first moment I realized Elena's pregnancy wasn't the only reason my parents were falling apart. That night, Elena slept on my couch holding a pharmacy bag against her chest. She cried so hard she could barely breathe properly, and sometime around 3 a.m., she suddenly asked me something I still think about constantly. Do you think they'll ever love my baby? Honestly, I didn't know how to answer that question, because deep down, I wasn't even sure they still loved her. Within days, people at church started whispering openly. Women stopped talking when Elena walked past. Neighbors stared too long. And my mother? She let people believe Elena disappeared voluntarily. Honestly, that betrayal hurt my sister more than getting thrown out. Because even after everything, she still wanted our mother to defend her. The next morning, my father changed the house locks. Not weeks later, the very next morning. And honestly, that was the moment I realized this wasn't temporary anger. My parents fully intended to erase Elena from the family completely. Our old family dog kept sleeping outside Elena's empty bedroom for weeks. Wouldn't move, wouldn't eat properly. And honestly, watching that dog wait for her every night somehow hurt worse than the screaming did. Because even the dog understood someone important was missing. A month later, I went with Elena to her ultrasound appointment. Dark room, soft monitor sounds, her hands shaking beside me. Then suddenly, we heard the heartbeat for the first time, and Elena started crying instantly, not from fear anymore, from love. And honestly, that was the exact moment I realized something important. My parents saw shame, but all Elena saw was her son. After Elena got thrown out, the three of us squeezed into my tiny apartment. One bedroom, thin walls, broken heater during winter. Elena slept beside the wall holding her stomach almost every night. And honestly, I don't think she slept peacefully once during that pregnancy, because every time her phone buzzed, she still hoped it was our parents. When Elena's baby shower approached, she mailed invitations to our parents anyway, handwritten, careful, hopeful. A week later, the envelope came back unopened. No message, no explanation, just return to sender. Honestly, I think that hurt her more than getting disowned. A few weeks before the birth, I noticed someone sitting quietly in the hospital parking lot after Elena's ultrasound appointment. My mother. She stayed inside her car the entire time, never came inside, never spoke to us. But honestly, she watched the hospital entrance until we left, and that's when I realized something strange. My mother wasn't pretending Elena didn't exist. She was pretending she didn't care. Elena went into labor during a thunderstorm, roads flooding, streetlights flickering, hospital packed. And honestly, I was terrified. Because while Elena screamed through contractions, she kept repeating the same thing over and over. I want mom. Not the baby's father, not me, our mother. And hearing that completely broke my heart. When my nephew finally cried for the first time, Elena started sobbing instantly, not quiet tears, full body crying, like years of fear left her all at once. Then the nurse placed him in her arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. And honestly, the second Elena touched that blanket, something strange happened to her expression. A few days later, I finally asked Elena where the blue blanket came from. She went quiet immediately, then softly admitted, She took it from our parents' attic the night she got thrown out. Honestly, I recognized the blanket instantly too, the faded blue stitching. The tiny hospital tag still sewn near the inside corner. Even the small bleach stain near the edge from years ago. And suddenly, I realized why my mother reacted so strangely whenever she saw blue. Because that blanket used to belong to our older brother Ethan, the one who died before Elena was born. The room went silent after that. Because nobody in our family talked about Ethan anymore. Not after the hospital. Not after the funeral. Not after my father locked his things inside the attic for years. But somehow, Elena secretly kept that blanket hidden anyway. And honestly, that was the exact moment I realized something devastating. My sister didn't take the blanket because she wanted a memory. She took it because the night our parents threw her out, it felt like the only piece of family love still left inside that house. Our family never talked about my brother. Not after the funeral. Not after the hospital. Not after the years that followed. It was like his name disappeared from the house completely. No photos, no stories, no conversations. But somehow, Elena kept that blanket hidden for years anyway. Every birthday, anonymous packages started appearing outside my apartment door. Small toys, children's books, winter clothes, never signed, never explained. But honestly, I started recognizing my mother's handwriting on the shipping labels almost immediately. One night, my nephew looked at Elena and quietly asked, "Why don't I have grandparents?" The room went completely silent, and honestly, I watched my sister's face break a little right there, because no matter how much love we gave that little boy, some absences still hurt. Everything changed after my aunt posted a birthday picture online accidentally. Cheap dinosaur decorations, plastic tablecloth, my nephew smiling under that blue blanket. 3 days later, my mother called me for the first time in years. And honestly, her voice sounded terrified. Because somehow, my father had seen the blanket. My mother called me 3 days after seeing the birthday photo online. First time in almost 3 years. And honestly, I almost didn't recognize her voice. She sounded nervous, shaky, like she'd been crying. Then quietly she asked, "Where did Elena get that blue blanket?" Not, "How is she?" Not, "How's the baby?" Just, "The blanket?" I found out later, my father saw the birthday picture accidentally while scrolling through my aunt's page. And the second he noticed the blue blanket, he dropped his coffee mug onto the kitchen floor. Because that blanket wasn't just fabric, it belonged to my older brother Ethan, the child my parents lost years before Elena was born. And honestly, nobody in our family had touched that blanket in over 15 years. The next morning, my parents drove 4 hours to Elena's apartment without warning. No phone call, no apology, no explanation. But honestly, my father never even made it to the front door first, because through the living room window, he saw the blue blanket immediately, wrapped around a laughing little boy near the birthday decorations. And suddenly, my father stopped walking completely. My mother grabbed his arm instantly, like she thought he might collapse. And honestly, for a second, my father didn't even look angry anymore. He looked terrified. Because after 15 years buried inside an attic, that blanket was suddenly alive again. Only now, it wasn't wrapped around the son he lost. It was wrapped around the grandson he refused to know. When Elena opened the apartment door, she froze completely. My mother started crying instantly. My father couldn't even look directly at her at first. And honestly, nobody knew what to say. Because some silence becomes so heavy over years, words stop feeling big enough to fix it. Then my nephew ran into the hallway holding his toy dinosaur, smiling, laughing, completely unaware of everything happening. And my father quietly asked, "What's his name?" Elena looked at him for a long time before answering softly, "Ethan." Honestly, I thought my father might collapse right there. My father was still standing near the apartment doorway holding the birthday cake box. Nobody inside the apartment had spoken yet. Not me, not Elena, not my mother. Then suddenly, little Ethan came running across the hallway laughing, tiny dinosaur pajamas, blue blanket dragging softly behind him across the floor. Pause. And honestly, the second my father heard that fabric sliding across the tiles, his entire expression changed. Like some memory hit him so hard he physically couldn't hide it anymore. Then, little Ethan stopped in front of him and smiled proudly. "Mommy says this blanket belonged to my uncle." Pause. The room went completely silent. Because suddenly, that blanket wasn't just an old family object anymore. It became Ethan, the hospital, the funeral, the grief nobody survived properly. And honestly, my father's hand started shaking so violently, he didn't even realize the cake box slipped from his fingers. White frosting exploded across the hallway floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My mother covered her mouth instantly. Elena looked frozen beside the kitchen counter. And my father? He just stood there staring at the blanket like he was seeing 15 years of buried grief standing alive in front of him again. My mother covered her mouth and started sobbing instantly. Not quiet tears, full emotional collapse. Because suddenly, all those years pretending Elena didn't exist became impossible to defend anymore. And honestly, I think seeing that little boy wrapped in Ethan's blanket destroyed every emotional wall she built after throwing Elena out. Later that night, Elena finally admitted why she took the blue blanket years ago, the night our parents threw her out. She ran upstairs before leaving because she felt completely alone. Then she saw Ethan's blanket hidden in the attic. And honestly, she said it felt like the only piece of family love still left in that house. My father sat quietly at the kitchen table for almost an hour before finally speaking. Then softly he looked at Elena and whispered, "I thought I was protecting this family." And honestly, that sentence made me angrier than the screaming ever did. Because throwing your daughter away isn't protection. It's fear pretending to be control. Right before leaving, my nephew walked over and climbed into my father's lap without hesitation. Tiny dinosaur pajamas, blue blanket dragging behind him. And honestly, watching my father hold that little boy while crying silently felt like watching 3 years of pride finally collapse. Because for the first time, he stopped seeing shame and started seeing family again. After my parents visited, nobody touched the blue blanket. It stayed folded quietly on Elena's couch the entire night. And honestly, everybody kept looking at it without saying anything, because suddenly, that blanket wasn't just connected to my nephew anymore. It reopened grief nobody in our family ever healed from. My parents stayed at a nearby motel that night, and around 2 a.m., my mother called me crying quietly. She admitted my father hadn't slept at all. Apparently, he just sat on the edge of the motel bed staring at the birthday photo on his phone, the one with little Ethan wrapped in the blanket. And honestly, I think guilt finally caught up to him. The next morning, my father finally admitted why seeing the blanket destroyed him so badly. For years, I thought he hated it because it reminded him of grief. But honestly, the truth was much worse than that. Years ago, the night my older brother Ethan died in the hospital, my father wrapped him in that same blue blanket one final time himself. The room went completely silent after he said that, because nobody in our family had ever heard him talk about the hospital before. Not once. Then quietly, my father described the hallway outside Ethan's hospital room. Bright white lights, cold vending machines, rain hitting the windows after midnight, and him, sitting alone in a plastic chair holding that blanket because he didn't know what else to hold anymore. Honestly, that was the first time in my life my father stopped looking emotionless to me and started looking broken. Then suddenly, he admitted something else. After Ethan died, my mother secretly washed the blanket over and over again, trying to remove the tiny blood stains near the stitching. but the marks never disappeared completely. And honestly, that detail almost destroyed me emotionally, because suddenly, the blanket stopped feeling symbolic. It started feeling haunted by everything my family never healed from. My father quietly described the hospital hallway for the first time in years. Cold vending machines, bright white lights, my mother screaming behind closed doors, and him, sitting alone holding that blanket afterward because he didn't know what else to hold. Honestly, that was the first time I realized my father wasn't emotionless. He was emotionally frozen. My father admitted something else that completely changed the way I saw everything. When Elena got pregnant unexpectedly, he panicked. Not because of shame alone, because losing Ethan made him terrified of losing another child emotionally too. And honestly, instead of handling that fear like a father, he turned it into control. My mother finally admitted something painful too. The night Elena got thrown out. She didn't fully agree with my father, but after Ethan died years earlier, she stopped fighting him about difficult things. Honestly, that confession made me angry in a completely different way, because silence can hurt families just as badly as cruelty. Before leaving town, my father asked if he could stop by the old family house with me. Inside the garage, he opened a dusty storage box hidden behind shelves. And honestly, the second I saw what was inside, I understood why he broke down at the birthday party. Baby shoes, hospital bracelets, old birthday cards, and folded carefully at the bottom, another blue blanket. I stared at the second blanket completely confused. Then my father quietly admitted something heartbreaking. After Ethan died, my mother secretly bought another identical blanket because she couldn't sleep without seeing it nearby. Pause. And honestly, that moment made me realize something painful. Our family never healed after losing Ethan. We just learned how to hide the damage better. Before we left the garage, my father handed me an old folded letter. Yellow edges, creased paper. Never mailed. It was written to Elena 3 years earlier. An apology. A real one. But honestly, he never sent it because pride mattered more to him than reconciliation. That evening, my father finally sat across from Elena at her apartment table quietly. No yelling, no excuses, no pride left. Then softly he said, "I punished you for my grief, instead of loving you through yours." And honestly, that was the first truly honest thing I'd heard my father say in years, because finally, he stopped pretending fear was the same thing as love. The morning after my father apologized, everything inside Elena's apartment felt strangely quiet. Not awkward quiet. Emotional quiet. Like everybody finally understood how close we came to losing each other forever. And honestly, for the first time in 3 years, my parents stayed long enough to eat breakfast with us. Little Ethan had no idea what was happening emotionally around him. He just kept showing my father toy dinosaurs excitedly, laughing, pulling on his sleeve, dragging the blue blanket behind him everywhere. And honestly, watching my father smile at him felt surreal. Because 3 years earlier, that same man refused to even say this child deserved love. While everybody sat quietly at the kitchen table, little Ethan suddenly handed my father a crayon drawing. Stick figures, blue scribbles, crooked hearts. Then proudly said, "That's Grandpa." Honestly, my father completely froze, because after 3 years of absence, this little boy still saved a place for him in the picture. My mother spent almost the entire visit nervous to touch Ethan directly. Like guilt itself made her hesitate. Then suddenly, Ethan climbed into her lap on his own. And honestly, the second she wrapped her arms around him, she started crying immediately. Not polite tears, deep shaking sobs, because suddenly, the grandson she ignored for years became real in her arms. That night, Elena admitted something none of us expected. For 3 years, she saved every voicemail our mother almost left, but deleted halfway through. Tiny recordings, breathing, crying, silence. And honestly, listening to those unfinished messages hurt worse than hearing nothing at all. Because deep down, our mother missed Elena the entire time. A week later, my father finally unlocked the attic himself for the first time in years. Honestly, the sound of that lock opening felt stranger than the screaming the night Elena got thrown out. Because growing up, that attic was treated like it didn't exist. Nobody cleaned it. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody even looked upstairs for too long. Like grief itself lived behind that door. The attic smelled like dust and old cardboard. Dim yellow light, covered furniture, storage boxes stacked against the walls. Then little Ethan wandered inside holding the blue blanket behind him. And honestly, the second my mother saw him standing there, she started crying immediately. Because suddenly, the attic didn't feel frozen in the year Ethan died anymore. It finally felt alive again. Then Elena slowly opened one of the storage boxes near the wall. Inside were old dinosaur toys, children's drawings, birthday cards, hospital bracelets, and carefully folded near the bottom, tiny clothes my parents never donated after Ethan died. Honestly, that was the moment I realized something heartbreaking. My parents never moved on from losing Ethan. They just buried every piece of him somewhere nobody would ask questions about it anymore. When little Ethan started running through the attic laughing, something inside that room changed completely. For years, that attic felt frozen in the night Ethan died. Dust everywhere, covered furniture, silent boxes nobody touched. But suddenly, there was laughter there again. Tiny footsteps. Toy dinosaurs crashing together. Blue blanket dragging across the floor. And honestly, the second my father heard little Ethan laughing inside that attic, he started crying quietly, because for the first time in 15 years, the room didn't feel haunted anymore. It finally felt alive again. After service, someone quietly asked my father, "Is this your grandson?" And honestly, for a second, I got scared he'd hesitate again. But instead, he smiled softly and answered, "Yes." And we should have loved him from the beginning. The entire hallway went silent, because finally, my father chose truth over pride. Before my parents left that evening, my father quietly asked Elena if he could hold the blanket one last time. Honestly, the entire apartment went silent after that. Because for years, nobody in our family could even touch that blanket without falling apart emotionally. Elena handed it to him carefully, and for a few seconds, my father just stood there staring at the faded blue stitching near the corner. E.H. Ethan Holloway. His fingers slowly moved across the old hospital tag still sewn near the inside lining. Then quietly, he looked at little Ethan playing on the floor nearby and whispered, "He would have loved you." And honestly, that sentence almost destroyed me emotionally, because suddenly, for the first time in years, my father wasn't talking about Ethan like a tragedy anymore. He was talking about him like family again. Then slowly, my father folded the blanket carefully and handed it back to Elena, not hiding it, not locking it away, not burying it inside the attic again, just softly saying, "Keep it with him." And honestly, that was the exact moment the blanket finally stopped belonging to grief alone. It became part of healing, too. 3 years ago, my father threw my pregnant sister out of the house believing she ruined the family. But honestly, the family was already broken long before that. We just hid it behind silence and pride. Pause. And in the end, the thing that brought everybody back together wasn't guilt. It wasn't religion. It wasn't time. It was a little boy wrapped in a blue blanket reminding my parents what love was supposed to look like. And honestly, I think that birthday party saved all of us. My parents spent 3 years pretending my sister's son didn't exist, until one blue blanket forced them to remember the child they never stopped missing.